Supah Ritz, Volume 2, The Pheenis Years. The Promotion, Part 2. Once I was promoted at Pheenis Pictures, I was not moved immediately off Medavoy's desk and into a corner office and offered a consult with an interior decorator to shape my space into a major creative power center. Instead, I was expected to continue my role as Mike's assistant while I set up a story department for Pheenis Pictures from Mike's desk. For me, this meant an inbox, an outbox, and a stack of submission slips on the credenza behind my chair. It didn't exactly jibe with my vision of a special room, something out of Mission Impossible, stacked floor to ceiling with perfectly bound screenplays, around which I would zip on precision casters, pulling scripts and files from a complex, yet meticulous system. Still, I was thankful for the promotion, even if it did not come with a raise, and determined to make it work. Mike seemed determined to make it work too, and I basked in the glow of his attention as he offered to set me up with an intro to an executive in the TriStar story department, someone who could help show me the ropes. This was the kind of mentorship I had been hoping for. Mike Medavoy himself pulling the levers of power to effect my entree into the big leagues, the ranks of film professionals at the major studios. TriStar didn't just have a story editor, they had a whole story department. These were guys who not only knew what they were doing, they took the business of story seriously. Of course, when I eventually did schedule the crucial meeting with TriStar, I was not ushered into the secret society of story gurus and transmitted the secret formula. Instead, a guy named Tom scheduled a phone call, and I just kind of walked him through my discombobulated system, and then he was like, "Yeah, that sounds about right." Really? 2 inboxes and some submission slips? I gotta admit, I was a little disappointed, but I was also relieved to not have to learn some elaborate and cumbersome system that I was unlikely to master. Also, isn't that how it goes with most things? They're shrouded in the mystery of expertise until you start doing them, and then you realize we are all just hairless primates bumbling our way through life. Lengthy aside, I learned last month at a cocktail party, 30 years later, that this Tom was none other than my good friend Tom Pace, now a highly sought-after marketing consultant for major studio releases. At the time we spoke, he was actually undergoing a probationary evaluation for fucking up the pagination of the latest Godzilla draft for circulation on the weekend read. Tom now assures me that he was indeed one of the worst organized story editors in the business, and much relieved when he left that job mere weeks after we spoke. He was also my mentor. But Tom's tepid vote of confidence gave me license to shape the Pheenis story department after my own vision. I hired all my brilliant unemployed friends who had taken their Ivy League diplomas and come to Hollywood to chase their dreams. We had John Stevens, who went on to run Gotham, Mike Ostrowski, who would go on to produce shows like The Blacklist, Derek Simons, the creator of The Sinner, Abigail Dillon, who is the current president of Earth Justice, and on and on. Not all of them were great fits for the job. When one of my friends saw the potential camp genius in a paranoid thriller called Hypertension, about a man who believes all the people around him are conspiring to convince him he has, wait for it, high blood pressure, she gave the script a consider. Upon getting the coverage, Marcia Nasser stomped right up to my desk in Mike's office, incensed. "Your friends are too smart," she complained. And she made me fire that reader right on the spot. Maybe she was right. Maybe some people are too imaginative and too sophisticated to be creating mindless pablum for the consumption of the masses. One of my other major administrative responsibilities as the story editor was to prepare and distribute the weekend read. The weekend read was the official selection of scripts that the company would read over the weekend, and it was my job to make sure copies were delivered to every executive. One of the problems with the weekend read, and why it was resented, aside from eating into everyone's leisure time, was that we all had reading beyond the weekend read. Everyone also had their personal weekend reads, made up of scripts from agents and writers and producers and friends, and those scripts in some ways took precedence, because one of the ways to get ahead in Hollywood was to cultivate relationships around town by proving you were responsive to submissions and could be an effective conduit for material at a company like Pheenis. Moreover, one of the ways of getting ahead at Pheenis was to bring a new piece of material into the company that might get turned into a film. You always had to be hunting for that piece of material that reflected your sensibilities and your instincts for commercial success. While the weekend read was mandatory for keeping your job, your personal read was the key to advancing your career. If the official weekend read got too cumbersome, it didn't leave much room to read all your other scripts. But Mike hated when the weekend read was light. Every Friday around noon, he'd bellow from his office, "What's on the weekend read?" And I would trot in the list of scripts that had been submitted by Marcia or Christy or Mike, along with whatever drafts of our projects had come in during the past couple days. If the list was too short, Mike would just add whatever scripts he had sitting around his desk, or so it seemed. Sometimes he might add a script at 5 p.m. on a Friday, and then I'd be frantically working the copy machine, as well as answering phones and typing notes and coordinating readers, trying to print and bind 7 copies of the script to get them on everyone's desk before they left for the weekend. I was also responsible for FedExing the weekend read to Diane Sokolow at her house in the Hamptons. Diane, a classy New York-based producer who had all of Manhattan's media elite on speed dial, served as our creative presence on the East Coast. Somehow, I'm still to this day mystified by how, I failed almost every single week to get Diane her weekend read. I would miss the deadline for FedEx. I'd make the deadline but forget to mark the package for Saturday delivery. I would mark it for Saturday delivery but forget to mark it not necessary to sign. I would forget to write leave on porch. Or I would do everything right and FedEx would still fuck it up. No matter what, something would go wrong and Diane would be pissed. I felt terrible and embarrassed and mystified and frustrated every Monday morning when Diane revealed at our weekend read meeting that, yet again, she failed to receive her scripts. I really thought I might get fired for this lapse, but it was not for lack of trying. I also didn't fight for that movie because I still felt pretty insecure about my creative instincts. Part of the reason was I just really didn't know shit about movies. I hadn't been to film school, and I'd never been a huge fan of the form. All I was relying on at that point in my career was my love of literature and my one reading of Sid Field's Bible on Screenwriting, Screenplay, The Foundations of Screenwriting, which I had read during my senior year at Georgetown. Weirdly, Sid Field often seemed like enough, and, full disclosure, it remains the template I apply to much of my work as a producer and writer today. Go ahead, make fun of me. I was also maybe insecure because the first 3 films Mike had identified to launch Pheenix Pictures, The Mirror Has Two Faces, The People vs. Larry Flynt, and Swept from the Sea, did not make a lot of sense to me. At least with Flynt, we had in Milos Forman, the director, Amadeus, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a veritable master at the helm. But the script was episodic and rambling, apologies to Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski, and certainly didn't conform to anything I'd learned from Sid Field. By the way, it won a Golden Globe and a WGA award, so what the fuck do I know? Mirror, to me, was a mystery. Why make a movie with Barbra Streisand at all, let alone one in which she was both director and star? To this day, I could not tell you what that movie was about. In fairness to Mike and the team, though, both of those movies were developed and produced by Sony. They were getting made with or without Pheenix, but when our financing closed, Pheenix was kissed into the financing structure as part of our overall arrangement with Sony. What's more, Mike had long, successful collaborations with both Forman and Streisand, so it made a kind of karmic, if not financial sense, that they became vehicles to launch the company. Still, I didn't like either choice, and it left me feeling like I didn't understand the business of film on some very fundamental level. And I was right. I knew so little about movies that I was nothing short of astounded when the dailies started coming in for Flynt. Dailies, by the way, are the raw, unedited footage the production shoots every day and shares with the financing entity. Prior to viewing the Flynt dailies, I had no idea that a film scene was constructed from a series of shots taken from different angles using lenses of varying size. Yes, I am referring to the most basic, rudimentary language of film. New to me, I don't know how I thought it was made. To create these many shots, the actors must perform the scene over and over again as the camera moves from position to position around the set and captures different moments, movements, actions, and reactions that will be assembled by the editor to create any given scene. It was a revelation to me when I saw that even though the camera might only be capturing Woody Harrelson's courtroom antics in Flynt, Edward Norton still had to continue to deliver his lines and performance with the same intensity over and over again, while the director got a wide of Woody that maybe included Courtney Love and the jury, and then switched lenses to get shots of Woody that might only include the actor himself. What I'm saying is, I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about how to make a movie. Still, Robert Evans makes a great point in his memoir, The Kid Stays in the Picture, when he talks about trusting your gut, especially when you don't like a film that everyone else seems to love. Our third film, Swept from the Sea, was different from Flynt and Mirror in that it was a screenplay Pheenix developed internally. Still, it was a screenplay I could never understand. It was the story of a stowaway, I guess, played by Vincent Perez, who gets washed up on the shore of a small town in England where he is treated like some kind of dangerous pariah because, hold your breath, he does not speak English. The only person who treats him with any kind of dignity or kindness is Amy Foster, played by Rachel Weisz, a virtual unknown at the time. Because she too is some kind of pariah. Wait, but why is she a pariah? No one is totally sure. When I was invited to a script meeting for the film and had the opportunity to ask the screenwriter, Tim Willix, to explain Amy Foster to me, I was like, what's up with Amy Foster? Like, what is her deal? Sure, maybe it's not the most articulate question. I was 23, but his response was earnest and heartfelt. She's a rain dancer, Nick. What? But this response seemed to satisfy all the higher-ups in the room, so I just had to accept I didn't understand shit about film. In fairness, Swept from the Sea was not without its graces. First, it boasted such ludicrous dialogue that it still delights me to this day. Rachel Weisz, the sea, the cruel sea, the dark sea, the ancient sea, where all the hearts of the earth lie waiting to be reborn. Again. What? Also, the movie's premiere marked Phoenix's ascension to the bigs. We had a huge invitation-only screening at the iconic Chinese theater, where Swept from the Sea was chosen to celebrate the American Film Institute's 30th anniversary. The head of the AFI introduced the film like it was Mike's debutante party, but when she mentioned the company, Pheenis Pictures, she somehow suffered an unfortunate slip of the tongue. And we wouldn't be here tonight, she proclaimed decorously, were it not for Mike Medavoy's Pheenis. She then somehow made the slip of the tongue worse by pausing here, giving the entire room leave to titter and then openly guffaw. She turned bright red before finishing, Pictures. We all died laughing. How could you not? It was in many ways a perfect and fitting launch for the Pheenis, as we would forever after affectionately refer to the company. For most of my tenure, the universe seemed to be using the company solely as a vehicle to showcase the comedic futility of human striving. Thankfully, by the time of that premiere, Mike had made what was for me his most crucial hire, Lindsay Bayman, to run business affairs. Lindsay, a Brit who grew up in Hong Kong, remains by far the smartest lawyer I've ever met. She famously took the California bar exam on a whim over in the States on vacation and passed without even studying. In fact, she was not even aware that America had a dual system of government, federal and state, and she still passed. That's how fucking smart she is. She is also a keen and wicked student of human behavior, and she became my partner in crime at Phoenix as we marveled in wide-eyed wonder at the relentless absurdity unfolding around us. Two insouciant teens shooting spitballs from the back of the classroom. I'll never forget the look on her face as we doubled over in hysterics as the Pheenis made its auspicious debut on the Hollywood scene. It was not long after the Swept from the Sea premiere that the challenge of balancing my responsibilities as a nascent development exec with my responsibilities as Mike's assistant became unmanageable. I started dropping the ball in the Saturday tennis match, scrambling every Friday night to pull together a doubles game for the next morning. My desk was a parody of disorganization, scripts and files and pamphlets spilling everywhere. Mike, who maintained an impeccable desk, hated it. Oftentimes I wasn't even at my battle station, because I was in development meetings with Marcia or Christy, dutifully taking notes and listening to pitches. It all started to get to Mike. It finally came to a head one weekend when he was hosting the former foreign minister of the USSR, Primakov? I can't remember exactly, and needed to make a plan to entertain the dignitary on Saturday night. I had suggested a dinner reservation at Spago, or a catered dinner up at Mike's house, but Mike was interested in neither. When Friday rolled around and he still had no plans, he decided that he wanted to take Primakov to Marcia Nasser's 80th birthday party. Marcia had, of course, invited Mike, but he had already turned the invitation down to host a visiting minister. Now, he told me, he wanted to bring the minister to Marcia's party. She was not having it. She'd done the seating, and it was an unfair imposition on the party's host, who I believe were Lorenzo Semple, writer of 3 Days of the Condor, and his wife. I had to beg Marcia to extend the invite to Mike. It seemed crazy to her. Why would this international diplomat want to come to her intimate birthday dinner? Whatever. She threw up her hands and relented. I then asked Mike if he wanted a car and driver to take him and the minister and their wives on the short drive from his house at the top of Coldwater to the Semple's house at the bottom, but he never responded. In fact, he told me he would let me know. When the day then got busy and he never decided one way or the other on the car, I let it go. I shouldn't have. I should have followed up with him to get a definitive answer. But I was sick of this part of my job, harassing your boss to make dumb decisions about their personal life, and I assumed he would drive himself. Private cars were crazy expensive back then. Hence we have Uber, and Mike hated to waste money. I thought it was reasonable to assume he didn't want to fork out the cash for a 9-minute drive down the hill. I was wrong. That Saturday night, as I was hosting a party at my own house, we threw a lot of parties back then, John Hart, the son of scandalized presidential candidate Gary Hart, who was famously caught on the bow of his mistress's boat, Monkey Business, showed up at my house in a full panic. John was part of Mike's informal entourage, and he had just come from Mike's house up the hill. He told me Mike was pissed. He and the Russian minister had waited and waited for a car and driver that never showed up. Mike had tried to call me, but I didn't have a cell phone back then, and I guess no one at my house heard the phone ring. Ultimately, they had to climb into Mike's Jeep Grand Cherokee, and Mike had driven them down the hill. It was fine, but I was in trouble. But what could I do? I tried calling Mike, but he was at Marcia's party by then, so I just drank my anxieties to rest and figured I'd face my fate on Monday. But Mike said nothing to me come Monday morning, and I could sense that he was pissed. Every morning he would dump a small pile of phone chits in his office outbox and call one of us to gather them off his desk. Richard gathered the messages and handed one of them to me. It read, "Nick, what happened to my car?" He was so angry he couldn't speak to me. I screwed up my courage and took the message immediately into his office to face him. I stood in front of his desk and tried to explain, but a call came in and he dismissed me with a wave of his hand. I was freaked out, but also in too deep to really do anything. The die, it seemed, was cast. But when he came back after lunch several hours later, there was a second pile of messages, and again, one for me. "Nick, what happened to my car?" Again, I went into his office to apologize and try to explain what had happened, that he hadn't made any decision on Friday. He disagreed. "No," he told me, "I told you I wanted a car." This was distinctly not what I remembered, and I told him as much, but he dismissed me again. But as the day was coming to a close, I was determined to resolve this dispute and not carry my anxiety about it through another night. I went into his office and took responsibility for the fuck-up. Maybe he hadn't decided, I acknowledged, but it was on me that I didn't follow up. I couldn't tell from his poker face if this was enough, if he accepted the apology, or maybe he was just over the whole thing and ready to move on. Still, it felt like a black mark against me that I would struggle to erase. The next day we had our Tuesday staff meeting. This was a weekly meeting held in a second-floor conference room, stale and clammy from the sun beating in through the bank of windows overlooking Washington Boulevard. Staff meetings would become a recurring source of anxiety for me. It was a weekly reckoning. On more nimble shoulders, it might have been an opportunity for me to shine, but I found it soul-crushing. What had I accomplished on the existing projects? Who had I met on the Hollywood circuit who could help get our movies made? Where was the next great piece of material coming from? What was the word around town? It felt like the high school cafeteria all over again. Only, in this case, you had to stand in the middle of it and tell the whole school who was sitting at your table and why. But at this meeting, Mike announced to the group they would need to start looking for my replacement. I had gotten, it seemed, too busy as an exec to keep working on his desk. They needed to find me an office and someone to take over Mike's phones. I was, at last, moving on. I guess you want to be good at your job, but not too good. You've still got to be bad enough they feel they can replace you when the time comes to move up.